Silence speaks the truth, Buddhist wisdom. In a quiet village nestled between the folds of misty mountains lived a young woman named Elara. She was known for her calm nature, her radiant beauty, and the serenity that followed her wherever she went. Elara never raised her voice. She never argued. Some thought she was timid, but others believed she possessed something rare, an inner light, a wisdom beyond her years. Elara was the daughter of a herbalist. She spent her days tending to her mother's garden and helping the villagers when they were sick or weary. Every morning she lit a single stick of incense at the family's small altar and whispered a prayer, "May all beings be free from suffering." But as it often happens in the world where there is light, shadows will gather. A group of villagers, particularly the wives of men who admired Elara's grace, began to whisper. First, it was idle talk. "She's too perfect, isn't she?" Then the rumors grew darker, sharper. "She visits the monastery too often. I saw her speaking with Brother Kale, the young monk, late in the evening when no one else was there." And so the word spread, like wildfire fed by dry wind. They said Elara was having an affair with the monk, that she had seduced him, that she had defiled the sanctity of the monastery. In a village where gossip was often taken as gospel, Elara's silence became its own crime. When her parents confronted her, her mother trembling with shame, Elara bowed her head, but spoke no defense. She only said, "If I speak, it will not erase their belief. But if I stay still, the truth may one day echo louder than the lies." Her father slapped her. Her mother turned away in tears. The next morning, a note was left at the temple's door. "A flower that tempts a monk cannot bloom in our village." Brother Kale was removed from his duties. Elara, though innocent, became a ghost among people she once called family. She was shunned at the market. No one would buy her herbs. Children were told not to speak to her. Yet every evening she still lit her incense and whispered the same prayer, "May all beings be free from suffering." The seasons changed, rain fell, crops grew, but bitterness in people's hearts remained. 1 year passed, and not once did Elara retaliate. Not once did she raise her voice to defend herself. One afternoon, an elder monk came down from the mountains to visit the village. He had heard of the scandal and asked to meet Elara. When they met, he looked into her eyes for a long while and then asked, "Why did you not speak, child? Even the Buddha refuted falsehood when it arose." She answered, "Yes, master, but the Buddha also taught that some truths cannot be shouted. They must be lived. If I speak, perhaps I could convince a few, but if I endure, the truth will outlast even their memory." The monk closed his eyes and smiled. There is great strength in restraint, and yet there is also danger when injustice is allowed to grow roots. That night, the elder monk lit incense beside Elara. Side by side, they knelt before the altar, and the villagers saw them. Whispers rose again, this time not of scorn, but confusion, respect, unease. The monk said nothing to them, only bowed and left, but his presence beside Elara was like a crack in the dam of doubt. Still, the wound in the village remained open. And then, one day, the woman who had begun the rumors, an influential villager's wife, fell ill. No medicine helped, no ritual soothed her pain. On her deathbed, she called for Elara. Few expected Elara to go, but she did. She sat beside the woman, offered her water, and wiped her fevered brow. With tears streaming down her face, the woman whispered, "It was me. I lied. I envied you. I thought if I destroyed your peace, I would find mine." Elara only took her hand and said, "Then let go of suffering now. Speak the truth and be free." The woman begged the monk to gather the village. With her dying breath, she confessed everything, how she invented the lie, how others fed it, how her envy had poisoned not just Elara's life, but her own soul. The silence that followed was heavy. The monk turned to the crowd and asked, "Who here can undo what was done? Who here can return her dignity, her peace, her name?" No one spoke, not even a whisper. Elara walked home that night through the heart of the village. Doors opened as she passed, heads bowed. No words were spoken, but for the first time in a year, she was seen, truly seen. She did not cry, she did not smile, she only lit her incense as always and whispered, "May all beings be free from suffering, even those who once wounded me." But inside her silence was the sound of truth. The morning after the confession, a strange hush blanketed the village, different from the silence that had clung to Elara's name for the past year. This silence was not born from fear or rejection, but from remorse, from the gnawing realization that they had allowed their ignorance to crush a soul as gentle as hers. Elara remained unchanged. She tended the garden, swept the courtyard, and fed the birds as she always had. Her movements were still slow, deliberate, like one who had long ago made peace with the impermanence of this world. But the villagers could not move on so easily. One by one, they began to appear at her gate. A child brought a bouquet of wild flowers. A woman left a basket of fruit with a note, "Forgive my silence." Even those who had shouted the loudest in anger now found themselves unable to speak in her presence. They stood at her doorstep, heads lowered, hands clenched, unable to meet her eyes. Elara welcomed none and turned away none. She simply bowed in silence. The village council, ashamed by their role in the exile of Brother Kael, summoned him back to the monastery. When he returned, his head was freshly shaved, his robes clean, his gaze softer. He asked for Elara's forgiveness, not for what he did, but for what he didn't do. "I should have spoken up," he said. "I should have stood beside you." She looked at him gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "You chose the path of peace, not defense. We both did, and truth, it seems, walked with us." The elder monk who had once visited the village returned again, this time not as a guest, but as a teacher. He organized a day of repentance, a gathering not of punishment, but of reflection. In the heart of the village square, a long white cloth was laid upon the ground. Each villager was invited to write a word of regret, jealousy, doubt, fear, lies. Children watched their parents cry for the first time. Elara was the last to approach. In front of hundreds of villagers, she took the brush, dipped it in ink, and wrote one word: compassion. She then knelt beside the cloth, placed her palms together, and bowed. The crowd followed. For a moment it felt like the village had become a monastery. The only sound was wind rushing through the trees. After the gathering, a woman approached Elara. Her name was Sarah, the younger sister of the very woman who had started the rumors. She had always remained quiet, watching from the shadows. "My sister destroyed your life," Sarah said, "and still you cared for her. Why?" Elara looked up, her voice steady and serene. "Because if I refused to offer compassion, then I too would be carrying the fire that burned me." Sarah broke down into tears. "I've never seen someone so kind or so strong." But Elara shook her head. "This strength is not mine. It is from the teachings I grew up with. The Buddha once said, 'Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love.' This is the eternal law. I chose to live by that." Word of the village's transformation began to spread. Monks from other temples came to visit. Pilgrims arrived, hoping to meet the silent woman who had lived through fire without uttering a single cry. One such visitor was a nobleman from the capital. He had heard the story from a merchant. The nobleman bowed deeply before Elara and asked, "Tell me, what should a man do if the world turns against him with lies?" Elara responded, "Let the world speak, but do not let it shape who you become. Even mud thrown at the moon cannot change its light." He smiled. "You are not just a healer of herbs, but of hearts." She smiled too, but only faintly. But not everyone agreed with the way things had unfolded. At the evening tea gathering, one of the village elders, rigid and pragmatic, spoke aloud in front of a crowd. If Elara had just spoken up, perhaps Brother Kael would not have lost his position. Perhaps the village would have been spared this shame. There was a murmur of agreement. A few heads nodded. But just as quickly, another voice rose, a middle-aged woman who had once mocked Elara. If she had spoken, would we have listened? We wanted to believe the worst. Her silence was a mirror, and we saw ourselves in it. The elder grumbled but said no more. Brother Kale stepped forward. She did not stay silent because she was afraid. She stayed silent because she trusted karma more than our judgment. And look, karma did not disappoint. The debate lingered. That night, villagers talked quietly in their homes. Was silence the right path, or should truth always be shouted from rooftops? Some said Elara was a saint. Others said she was a fool for enduring so much pain. And in this tension, between praise and judgment, lay the true brilliance of her choice. For Elara never tried to be right, she tried to be free. And in her freedom, others began to question their own chains. As autumn neared, the monastery invited her to speak at the annual Festival of Reflection. She declined the invitation to speak, but agreed to attend. When her name was announced, the crowd stood. Elara walked quietly to the center of the gathering, bowed, and simply said, "I have no great truths, only this. What you do not say can be more powerful than what you scream." She turned and walked away, and still not a soul sat down. They watched her retreat into the golden light, her white dress catching the sun like a halo. The first light of spring touched the village like a quiet blessing. Trees that had long stood bare began to bloom, and so too did something in the hearts of the villagers, something soft, something new. Elara, as always, rose before dawn. Her days were unchanged, sweeping leaves from the courtyard, boiling tea for her mother, lighting a single stick of incense before the altar. But now something had changed around her. People no longer averted their eyes. Children, once warned to stay away, would now run past her gate and shout greetings. And perhaps most striking of all, those who once whispered behind her back now came to her for guidance. One afternoon, a boy no older than 10 stood outside her gate. He was thin, his clothes torn and oversized. He clutched a small wooden box. When Elara opened the gate, he didn't speak. He only placed the box in her hands and bowed deeply. Inside was a crumpled note and 3 coins. The note read, "You gave me food when no one knew. You gave me hope when I had none. Please, let me be your son." Breath caught in her throat. She remembered him, a boy she had passed by many times at the village edge. She had left small parcels of food beneath the Bodhi tree each morning, thinking they had disappeared with the wind. But it had been him all along. She looked down at the boy. He said nothing, only watched her with eyes that had seen too much sadness for his age. Elara kneeled, placed her hand on his head, and whispered, "Then let us walk this path together." From that day on, Elara was no longer alone. She taught Tobin how to grow herbs, how to chant simple sutras, how to find stillness even in pain. He, in turn, brought life back into her home. His laughter was shy but radiant, like a candle rekindled after a long night. But still, the village was restless. One evening during a public teaching at the temple, the elder monk who had first visited the village addressed the people. "There are many ways to carry truth. Some use swords, others use silence." A man raised his hand. It was the same elder who had once challenged Elara's silence. "Master," he said, "if Elara had spoken, we would not have wronged her. Doesn't silence allow lies to grow?" The monk smiled gently. "And when you believed the lies, was it because no one denied them, or because you wanted to believe them?" The elder was silent. The monk continued, "A silent forest is still full of life, but if you listen only for thunder, you will miss the whisper of the wind." That moment stirred the crowd, but it also opened a divide. Some still questioned Elara's choice. Was it forgiveness or foolishness? Was it strength or weakness masked in passivity? These questions spread like embers. And Elara, she said nothing, but her actions grew louder. She turned a small piece of her family's land into a garden of refuge. There she welcomed anyone who carried regret, grief, or shame. People came not to speak, but to sit among the jasmine and listen to the silence. One woman, once the most venomous voice against Elara, came and knelt at her feet. "My husband left me," she wept. "He said I had poisoned everything with my words." Elara gently placed her hand over the woman's. "Pain repeats itself when we carry it from one person to the next. Break the chain, "Forgive yourself." A monk passing by whispered, "She speaks so little, and yet heals so much." At the summer solstice festival, Elara and Tobin were invited to light the first lantern in the temple garden. Hundreds gathered. Before lighting the flame, the abbot turned to Elara and asked, "Do you have a message for the people?" She looked around. Faces once filled with judgment now glowed with reverence, with guilt, with hope. She turned to Tobin and handed him the lantern. "You speak," she said softly. The boy looked nervous. Then he stepped forward and with a trembling voice said, "Miss Elara taught me that silence is not empty. It is full of listening, full of peace, full of truth." The crowd fell silent. He bowed deeply. The lantern floated upward, its light reflected in tear-filled eyes below. That night, the village square was filled with debate. She should be a nun. No, she's more than that. She was foolish not to defend herself. She was wise enough to know the truth didn't need defending. And beneath the lantern-lit sky, strangers, once divided, began to speak to one another, some in praise, some in confusion, but all because of her. One final moment brought the journey full circle. A traveling scholar came to the village and asked to meet Elara. "I've studied hundreds of teachings, debated truths in royal courts," he said, "but your story has reached even the palace. They say you embody the Dharma." Elara smiled softly and said, "Only, I am still learning how to listen." He laughed. "Then perhaps listening is the highest form of wisdom." As he left, he asked one final question. "If you could go back to that first day of slander, would you speak up this time?" Elara looked out across the fields. Tobin was chasing butterflies among the flowers. The sun was beginning to set. "I would still be silent," she said, "because in that silence, the truth had room to grow."